For nearly 8 decades, the United States has ruled not through armies, but through invoices. Its currency became the bloodstream of world trade, a symbol of trust, order, and inevitability. Yet beneath that calm surface, a paradox grew. How can a nation remain the monetary heart of the planet while its own industrial pulse fades? Factories moved east. The balance sheet stayed west. America's greatest export was no longer steel or oil. It was credit. There's a difference between the strength of the dollar and the world's dependence on it. One is power, the other, addiction. For decades, that dependence was the crown jewel of the empire. Today, it feels like a chain. Every sanction, every printed trillion, every geopolitical gamble tightens it a little more. Even allies have begun to flinch. They trade in dollars, but dream in alternatives. The currency that once served as a compass now feels like a weapon pointed inward. Because trust, once stretched too far, becomes control. And control, when abused, breeds fear. The same fear that brought down every empire that mistook obedience for loyalty. Rome didn't fall when the barbarians crossed the Rhine. It fell when its silver coin, the denarius, lost its moral weight. The metal was still there, the image of the emperor still stamped upon it, but the faith was gone. The dollar's twilight isn't about numbers. It's about belief. The belief that this green paper, or its digital echo, still carries truth, that it still represents work, honesty, and value. Empires die when their money lies, and somewhere, deep inside Washington's vaults and Wall Street's algorithms, the empire knows it. The illusion of infinite dollars. They didn't build an empire on gold. They built it on belief. In 1971, when Nixon cut the last link between paper and metal, the world entered a new religion, one where faith replaced substance. Gold was honesty, paper was promise. But after that summer, confidence itself became the raw material of economics. The dollar no longer represented what America produced. It represented what the world trusted. And for a while, that trust felt infinite. The printing presses became silent soldiers. Debt turned into diplomacy, and the Federal Reserve, once a banker's institution, evolved into the high priest of global stability, or illusion. Every nation began to borrow in a language it didn't control. Every bank, fund, and government plugged itself into the same invisible grid, the credit system anchored in Washington. It was an army without uniforms, enforcing order through spreadsheets, not swords. But the illusion had a cost, not measured in dollars, but in psychology. When a country believes it can print without paying, it forgets the ancient rule of empires. All wealth borrowed from the future must someday be repaid in faith. And faith, unlike money, cannot be printed. The United States public debt isn't a mathematical error. It's a mirror, reflecting a civilization that consumes more belief than it creates. It's not a budget problem. It's a spiritual one, because every empire begins by exporting goods and ends by exporting its currency. That's when confidence becomes the last commodity left to sell. The illusion of infinite dollars is not an economic theory. It's a moral anesthetic. It numbs decline until the pain returns all at once. When trust becomes a weapon, empires rarely need to fire, they simply disconnect. In the modern age, the most feared battlefield isn't made of land or steel. It's made of code. The SWIFT network, the arteries of global payment, became Washington's quiet battlefield. One sanction, one blocked transaction, and a nation could vanish from the world economy overnight. Trust, once the foundation of money, became a strategic asset. The dollar was no longer neutral. It was a tool of compliance. Those who obeyed were granted access. Those who resisted were exiled into financial darkness. At first, it seemed brilliant. The United States could punish without invading, dominate without declaring war. But every empire that turns its currency into a weapon forgets the same rule. Once trust is weaponized, it stops being trusted. From Moscow to Beijing, from Riyadh to Brasilia, whispers grew into plans. The word de-dollarization was not born of rebellion. It was born of self-defense. These nations aren't rejecting the dollar because they hate America. They're rejecting the idea that one nation's code decides another's fate. They watched billions frozen, reserves seized, contracts rewritten in a keystroke, and they understood no money is safe when safety depends on politics. The tragedy is quiet but profound. What made the dollar powerful was not fear, but faith. And faith cannot be commanded. It must be earned, every day, in every transaction, across every border. Yet the empire chose control over credibility. And in doing so, it began to lose both. The world no longer asks, how strong is the dollar? It asks, how long will it be trusted? The dollar, as a global drug addiction, always begins with relief. After wars, crises, or market tremors, the world turns to the same dealer, the Federal Reserve. Every cut in interest rates, every liquidity injection, every bailout feels like oxygen. Markets rise, governments breathe, and the illusion of stability returns. But like any drug, the comfort fades faster each time. The global economy is hooked on American liquidity. Banks in Europe, funds in Asia, and treasuries in Africa all crave the same flow of dollars. Not because they trust it, but because they need it. The system was designed that way. The dollar became the bloodstream of finance, and the Fed, its beating heart. Yet dependence breeds fragility. When the supply expands, euphoria reigns. When it tightens, chaos begins. The world has lived through this cycle for decades. Boom and drought, dopamine and despair. Quantitative easing, then tightening. Stimulus, then silence. Every move from Washington sends tremors through boardrooms in Berlin, factories in Mumbai, and stock floors in São Paulo. No empire has ever controlled the moral temperature of the planet until this one. The Fed's decisions now regulate not just inflation, but emotion, fear, hope, and greed, all synchronized to its pulse. And what does that say about us, about humanity, when the rhythm of our ambition is set by an unelected committee in a marble building thousands of miles away? The addiction to dollars isn't just financial, it's psychological. It's the comfort of believing someone else still has control. But every high ends the same way, with the realization that dependence is not stability. The dollar was never infinite. It only felt that way while the world was high. The geopolitics of de-dollarization. It began as whispers in trade ministries and oil boardrooms. Now it's a quiet rebellion. The BRICS alliance, China, Russia, India, Brazil, South Africa, once divided by ideology, now united by necessity. They aren't merely trading goods, they're trading faith. Faith that value can exist outside the dollar's orbit. Every empire believes its money is eternal. Rome believed in silver, Britain in sterling, America in green. But every system grows brittle when others stop needing it. And that moment has arrived. Beijing signs oil deals in yuan. Moscow builds payment networks that bypass SWIFT. Riyadh negotiates in multiple currencies. Even smaller nations, Indonesia, Argentina, Iran, begin settling in local or regional units. It's not just economics, it's symbolism. The world is saying, we remember how control feels. Then comes the silent gold. Gold, energy, commodities, the tangible anchors that empires once abandoned for convenience, return as insurance against digital obedience. In vaults from Shanghai to Dubai, bars of metal trade places quietly, a reminder that in times of doubt, people reach for weight, not code. But here lies the paradox. Every revolt against the dollar dreams of independence, yet each new system imitates what it resists: centralization, surveillance, the same hunger for control. The empire's shadow lingers in its rivals. History teaches that breaking a currency's dominance is harder than toppling a throne. It requires not just trade, but trust, a moral consensus that power can be shared. And so, the de-dollarization movement faces its own dilemma. Can the world build a new order without becoming the next empire? The invisible era of the United States. Every empire collapses for the same reason. It starts believing its own myth. For decades, America mistook privilege for genius. The world bought its debt, trusted its markets, and financed its wars, not because it had to, but because it believed in the story, the dollar as destiny, the United States as steward of stability. But belief, once earned, can rot from within. The greatest threat to American hegemony isn't China or Russia or any external enemy. It's the corrosion of credibility, the quiet erosion of moral authority that once made the green paper sacred. Inside the empire, division deepens. Political gridlock turns fiscal discipline into theater. Deficits no longer spark debate, they're routine. Debt ceilings are lifted like ritual sacrifices to appease markets. Meanwhile, Wall Street grows richer, Main Street emptier, and the nation forgets the arithmetic of restraint. The dollar's problem is not inflation, it's faithflation, a decline in belief that numbers mean what they say. For generations, the world saw US treasuries as the safest promise ever written. Now they read them like poetry, beautiful but not binding. The cognitive error is profound. Washington confuses reserve of value with reserve of power. But they are not the same. Power demands trust, and trust is earned not by printing, but by principle. Somewhere in the corridors of the Federal Reserve and the Pentagon, they know this. They know the system's foundations tremble. But to admit it would be fatal, because in a monetary empire, confession is collapse. The human factor, fear, control, and self-deception. No empire falls overnight. It erodes in denial. Societies rarely accept decline, they negotiate with it. They raise interest rates to defend confidence, print money to stabilize markets, and call protectionism patriotism. But behind every policy lies the same emotion: fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of admitting that the old system no longer works. Fear that truth, once spoken, will trigger panic. The United States, like Rome before it, stands at that psychological brink. The economy still functions, the currency still dominates, but the faith holding it together grows brittle. And so, it compensates. More credit, more control, more narrative. The empire no longer sells value, it sells belief in itself. The neuroeconomics of decline follow a pattern. First comes denial, it's temporary. Then rationalization, we can manage it. Finally, projection, it's their fault. But reality isn't fooled. Interest payments consume budgets, trust erodes across oceans. Citizens sense something hollow beneath the prosperity, a quiet moral fatigue. Easy money feels like comfort, but it carries a hidden cost, the erosion of responsibility. The psychology of empire is simple and tragic. Pleasure now, consequence later. That's how civilizations collapse, not through invasion, but through indulgence. And when denial becomes the last remaining policy, the end is no longer a question of if, only when. The last faith of the empire. Every currency is a confession. It tells the world what a nation truly believes in. For 2 generations, the dollar confessed faith in progress, in endless growth, endless credit, endless confidence. But beneath that promise lay a quiet decay, the loss of meaning behind the numbers, the separation of value from virtue. The dollar became the mirror of modern civilization, reflecting both its brilliance and its blindness. We trusted the system not because it was honest, but because we were afraid of what would happen if it wasn't. The real crisis isn't monetary, it's moral. When money ceases to represent work, limit, and integrity, it stops being a tool and becomes a toxin. A society that treats debt as creation and speculation as salvation eventually runs out of truth to sell. Empires don't die because their enemies are stronger. They die when their currency no longer carries faith, when the promise behind the paper loses its soul. And yet, history offers a strange hope. Each collapse carries the seed of rebirth. When the illusion fades, responsibility returns. When trust is rebuilt, not on privilege but on honesty, money can once again serve life instead of rule it. Perhaps the next revolution will not be digital or political, but moral, when we remember that value was never printed, only earned. Like King Midas, America turned everything it touched into wealth, until even life lost its color. The empire mistook gold for glory, control for safety, and faith for obedience. But gold, real gold, moral or metallic, does not burn in collapse. It waits, silent, for those who remember why it mattered. So ask yourself, when money no longer holds meaning, what will you trade for trust? And when the last faith of the empire fades, who will dare to build the next one on truth? If you learned something from this video, leave a like and see you next time.